Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My name is Dr. محمد العسكري. I'm going to teach you simultaneous interpretation. Dear students, you know that you've last year studied consecutive interpreting, which is branded as less difficult than simultaneous interpretation. This year, we're going, inshallah, to study simultaneous interpretation, which is actually commonly described as the most intricate human activity that a human being might be assigned the task to do. Simultaneous interpretation course will be made up of two courses. In the first course, actually, we will shed light on simultaneous interpretation, theoretical literature, theoretical knowledge, and of course we'll have an introduction to simultaneous interpretation, like, for example, what simultaneous interpretation is, the difficulties and challenges that potential simultaneous interpreters might be encountered with. And this course actually will also focus on techniques to master the simultaneous interpretation. Like, for example, shadowing, bettering our memory capacities, and also having simulations of real life simultaneous interpretation events. The course will be only from English into Arabic and will span for 15 weeks. Course 2 will be on simultaneous interpretation from Arabic into English, and we will have also exercises and practice on learning simultaneous interpretation. And but let me, of course, before that, give you an introduction to the definition of simultaneous interpretation. And there is a general consensus over this definition, actually. Simultaneous interpretation is a process which allows people to communicate directly across language and cultural boundaries using specialized technology. Of course, here by the technology we mean the equipment, the simultaneous interpretation equipment, like, for example, headsets, receivers, transmitters. And this is what professional interpreters are acquainted with. They are actually trained to listen to one language while speaking at the same time in another. Of course, the importance of simultaneous interpreting is now evident for every stakeholder involved in the process of simultaneous interpreting. And let us just have an idea of the setting where simultaneous interpretation occurs. The interpreter sits in a booth and listens to a spoken speech and simultaneously, orally interprets the speech into the target language. This is why simultaneous interpretation requires accurate and complete translation at the same rate of a speech as the speaker, the same rate of the speech as the speaker, with only a few seconds of lag time. Indeed, the studies shows that the décalage, let us say in English we call it the lapse of time, time lapse, after which the interpreter starts rendering his version, is about 2 to 3 seconds, no more. Again, simultaneous interpreting means to listen and to speak at the same time. It also means high requirements concerning the active and passive mastering of the working languages. Studies shows that I've already mentioned this, and let me tell you that the ideal speaking velocity of the orator means about 100 to 120 English words for the interpreter. And I think now it's good to also shed light on the history of simultaneous interpretation, when it really began. It really began after the Nuremberg trials, after the World War II, and continued after the establishment of the League of Nations. So from that date on, it developed in all its ways. And you remember last year you studied consecutive interpreting, so it might be good to also differentiate between the two. And here are the main differences between the two, because each one have their own advantages. However, the main distinguishing features are that simultaneous interpretation occurs while the source is ongoing and does not require the speaker to pause while the interpretation is rendered. Consecutive interpretation, on the other hand, requires that the source message stops while the interpretation is rendered. Consecutive tends to put more demands on memory, while simultaneous puts more demands on rapid processing. A message can be rendered into a target language using either consecutive or simultaneous interpreting, and let alone the fact that simultaneous interpretation is a time-saving process. This is why for some events it is preferred over the consecutive interpretation mode. And the development of consecutive interpreting skills helps develop the interpreting process because it allows additional time for comprehending the message and rendering the interpretation. If the underlying interpreting process is in a place, the skill can be further developed. And here, simultaneity can be added. Indeed, Giles, in his 2001 module of consecutive and simultaneous interpretation, has developed phases for the process of both. The first is the listening phase. And here, of course, we have the listening effort, production effort, the short-term memory effort. And we have the reformulation phase, and about one we've got note reading effort. Read and deciphers one's own notes. Second, we've got the long-term memory effort for retrieving information from long-term memory. And third, we've got production effort for producing the message in the target language. The skills and techniques of simultaneous interpretation, of course, one is required to organize and comprehend messages at the same time, simultaneously, and he or she must be armed with good prediction skills. And of course, it's inevitable to have bilingual proficiency and bicultural proficiency. There should be also a very good degree of concentration, retention, decalage, which we already mentioned. It is time lapse. We will adopt, resort, if you like, to some sources. These are the United Nations Audiovisual Library, which is essential because if you log into their website, you'll find a lot of interesting speeches audio pieces, audio-visual texts that will be, of course, very helpful in your endeavor to learn simultaneous interpretation. In addition to that, of course, we've got the BBC websites, the VOA, Voice of America, and of course, there are a lot. We'll have, of course, exams, and with simultaneous interpretation course, I might argue that it is different from the evaluation adopted by colleagues with other courses, because this is mainly dependent on practice. This is why we will have more than even 4 or 5 exams, because these exams, of course, are not only meant to test you, but they are also meant to get you the use of getting yourself acquainted to the habit of practicing simultaneous interpretation. However, in general, we will have for each course 25 mark as evaluation of students' performance. And as I've already mentioned, this is meant to assess your ability and competence in simultaneous interpreting. Thank you very much. Wish you every success in this year. Assalamu alaikum.